Shabbat Shalom. In this week's reading, we are reviewing Vayechi, the weekly reading. Vayechi means, and he lived. It's about the life and death of our forefather Jacob. Jacob and all his children and all his family move from the land of Israel down to Egypt. Joseph has prepared them a place where to live in Goshen. And basically, the horrors of what his brothers did to Joseph turned out to be the planting of Joseph for life, for the whole family and for the whole region and for Egypt itself. And so Jacob finally comes down to Egypt. They basically evacuate and abandon whatever they had left in the land of Israel. Let's not forget they were shepherds, and they came down to Egypt to be shepherds. And Joseph made sure to it that they would not melt in to the Egyptian population. They were given a distinct separate area in the Delta, in Goshen. Don't forget the Nile River comes down from the heart of Africa and moves northward towards the Mediterranean. And the Delta is a very rich area, and the Israelites of that time, the family of Jacob and the children, were shepherds. The Egyptians, the pharaonic Egyptians, despised shepherds. And so they were to be left separately in their own little colony. And this is something that Joseph did also so that they would not mix in with the remainder of the Egyptian population. What I wanted to talk about in this week is a number of things. We saw the last three readings. We read about how the brothers put Joseph in a pit, go off to have a barbecue before killing him, and then when they come back after their lunch, they find that Joseph is gone. He was lifted out of the pit by a caravan of Midianite and Ishmaelite traders, and they knew exactly who he was. They took him down to Egypt, and they sold him for 20 pieces of silver to Potiphar. Potiphar appointed him as head of the household. Potiphar was blessed by Joseph's presence. And then, of course, we remember the story of Potiphar's wife who tried to seduce Joseph. And when he refused to be seduced, she said that he wanted to seduce her. And so Potiphar put him in jail. And so he was in jail. And the head jailer saw that Joseph was a good man and appointed him as head of the jail. And the jailer was very blessed that he appointed Joseph as his number one man. So we see Joseph as number one under Potiphar, number one in the jail, and then after solving Pharaoh's dreams, number one in the court of Pharaoh. And because Pharaoh chose Joseph, and because Joseph knew how to assess the dreams of Pharaoh, Joseph indeed saved Egypt and the world, the known world at that time, from starvation, and saved 7 years of food. He built special vaults in the stone along the Nile River to store all this grain. And to this day, now archaeologists are finding these tremendous cuts in the stone of Egypt, and at the bottom they find pieces of wheat going back 4,000 years. And so Joseph basically saves Pharaoh, saves Egypt, the Egyptians, saves his family, and many nations all around came to Egypt in order to have food and not to die from the starvation. And so Jacob dies at age 147. There is great mourning. Pharaoh at that time was very, very pro-Israelite, pro-Israel. And Pharaoh allows Joseph to mount an expedition to carry Jacob back to Hebron to bury him where his father and his grandfather were all buried. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, buried all together at the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. And of course, Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah are buried also in Hebron. And a very important point that I wanted to share is that today, the Muslim world, the United Nations, the President of the United States, all claim that the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron is a holy Muslim site. And one of the things I wanted to share is that I would be willing to consider Hebron, the tomb of the patriarchs, being a holy place for the Muslims. If Ishmael had been buried there, if Esau had been buried there, if Hagar, the mother of Ishmael, had been buried there. But the fact is that none of them are buried there. Where are they buried? And I ask people, where are they buried? There is no mention, there is no record of Hagar, Ishmael, or Esau being buried in Hebron. So where are they buried? No one knows. And I wanted to go back 2-3 readings, weekly readings, to the story of Jacob coming out. Again, everything revolves around Jacob. Jacob comes back to the Holy Land with his 4 wives, and he sends emissaries to Esau, and Esau is coming with 400 men to receive him. And the 400 men, if you do the calculation, very simple to understand. Ishmael had 12 sons. Now, he has one daughter mentioned by name, Machalat, but I believe that Ishmael had 12 daughters. And I believe that the 12 sons and the 12 daughters, 24 kids, each one had 12 sons and 12 daughters. And of course, Esau marries one of the daughters of Ishmael. So you can understand where the 400 men came from. What do we know about Ishmael? Ishmael was a wild ass, a wild donkey, if we go back to Genesis 16, verse 11. His hand will be against all his brethren's hands, and all his brethren's hands will be against his hand, and he will dwell in the face of his brethren. It means Ishmael was constantly at war. This prophecy in Genesis 16, verse 11, happens before the birth of Ishmael. What do we see by the time Joseph and Jacob are in Egypt? We see the generations that came down from Ishmael and Esau, the generations of Midian. Don't forget the Midianites, the children of Keturah, the children of the concubines. They are all out there to the east of Egypt. And none of them are buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. There's only one genealogy. It's the genealogy of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. What do we know about Esau? When Isaac, I want to say in quotes, when Isaac blessed Esau, he says, Al charbecha tichyeh. In Hebrew, Al charbecha tichyeh means you will live by the sword. And I'm wondering to myself, did Isaac really bless, or did he curse his son? And I believe he cursed his son, because he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. And birds of a feather flock together. Esau marries the daughter of Ishmael, the man who sodomized his father. Because we know, if we go back, Ishmael sodomized Isaac. So there's a lot of psychological baggage here. The family is divided into two. You have the Ishmaelites and the Esauites together as one family, men of the sword, men of constant warfare. And these are the 400 who came to reach Jacob. Jacob did a very smart thing by sending a mincha, or sending an offering, to his brother Esau, because otherwise they would have been killed. So let's get back to Hebron. Let's get back to the tomb of the patriarchs. Why aren't Hagar, Esau, and Ishmael buried there? The reason is because they may have won 99 wars. They lived by the sword, but then they died by the sword. And because they died by the sword, you know what? When you die in the sword as a nomad in the desert, nobody's going to bury you. You're going to be eaten by the vultures. And so, very sad to say, I believe Hagar, Ishmael, and Esau died by the sword in the desert in some battle that was never mentioned in history. Because the simple truth, the simple fact is they are not buried in the tomb of the patriarchs. And so the tomb of the patriarchs is a place only holy for the Jews and the Christians, not for the Muslims. Very important to stress. It says, and this is the last reading of 12 readings in Genesis, where we see the name Jacob, that Jacob, while he's still alive. And it says for all Christians that the lineage for the Christians is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so here we see the conclusion of the book of Genesis, the book of creation. We see the burying of Jacob in the tomb of the patriarchs, and then the shift to Egypt takes place for 400 years. And also, if we go all the way back to the early part of Genesis, we see indeed that God says to Abraham when Abraham has his dream. He goes into a deep sleep after they cut open the sacrifices to God, and they make the burnt offering, and God sends a torch to pass through the cut offerings. And God says, your descendants will go down for 400 years and to be slaves, and they will come back with great wealth. And I will judge those people. God doesn't say the Egyptians, but it's understood the Egyptians. The 400 years of slavery, something that the Jewish people have never ever forgotten to this day. And it's one of the reasons why the Jews have always opposed slavery, and the Jews have always worked for human rights and opposed even apartheid in South Africa. And so the blessings of Genesis lead us into the next book of Exodus, where we are slaves. And I have written 6 books. My 5th book is about Genesis, and it leads straight into the 6th book, which is about Exodus. And I recommend to all of you who are interested in more on this subject to obtain these books, obtain the CDs, DVDs from my website, which is www.vicmord.com. And I think you will learn things there that most Jews, most rabbis never talk about. I hate to say I'm very unique in sharing this information. It's not something normally that you're going to hear in the synagogues. So God bless all of you. Shabbat Shalom. And the next week's teaching will be about the first teaching of the book of Exodus, and it's called the weekly reading Parashat Shmot, or the weekly reading of Exodus. Shabbat Shalom.